Hello, I'm Kim Castellanos, Marin Women's Hall of Fame honoree, class of 2013. It is my pleasure to sit down with this year's Marin Women's Hall of Fame inductees to learn more about their lives, careers, and journeys that have led them to be honored in this way. Since 1987, the Hall of Fame has inducted over 160 women of distinction, women who have made immense contributions to the County of Marin and its residents, as well as the world beyond. Honorees have distinguished themselves in many fields: education, science, business, philanthropy, the arts, politics, law, philosophy, and religion. Each honoree has been a force for positive change in our communities. It is a great privilege to acknowledge and document their contributions. Today it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jean Shinoda Bolen, who is being honored in 2025 for her pioneering work in health and medicine. Hello, Jean. Dr. Bolen, how are you today?
It's good to be here.
Excellent, excellent. Well, let's start by having you introduce yourself, including your name and what you do.
Well, I'm Jean, Jean with Shinoda and Bolen. So those are the three names with MD after it. And I started out not thinking I was going to enter the profession. I thought I was going to be a lawyer because I was a high school debater, a college debater, whatever, and fascinated with everything that I was learning. But somewhere along the line, I ended up feeling that I should move towards medicine, which was not my scientific side. But somehow I made it in, and I'm just amazed at how this every step along the way has often been one in which there's been a real question about, do I continue or what am I doing here? Until I got settled finally in psychiatry, and in not the normal psychiatry, which focuses on patients rather than on patient people who expand and grow into both sides of themselves and also into their own talents. And so it's been such a privilege to be a Jungian analyst and have the practice in the only major city at the time that was right in that city, San Francisco. So there's been an interesting path that I would encounter and move on and grow. And I thought I was going to be a lawyer because I was a debater, but nope. I was up in the mountains at a spiritual camp, and it just became so clear that I should be a medical person because my mother was also a physician, but she and I were, she was very scientific in lots of ways, and I was this person who wandered about and got influenced by all kinds of things. So it's been an interesting life, really.
Well, that's fantastic, and I know you have a very interesting upbringing. So perhaps you could share a little bit with us about your unique upbringing and how that helped to shape who you are today.
Well, one of the things that was totally unexpected was that I was in kindergarten when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. And when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, suddenly almost all people of Japanese ancestry, even if they were born here, even if they had lived here, and almost everyone at that time was in California, and there was going to be a very short period after Pearl Harbor was bombed on the Hawaiian Island that there was an intensity to build concentration or relocation camps in the middle of nowhere, and that people of Japanese ancestry, it could be that we were all American citizens born here, and grandparents moved from Japan to the United States because they grew into Christianity, and it was really not a good thing at that time over there. So here we were in California, and over a very short period of time, we'd better look out for being picked up and taken into temporary stables, Santa Anita racetrack stables, while the concentration camps or relocation camps were being built in the middle of nowheres. So we managed somehow. I mean, I talked about in my autobiography about how It was. It started out when I was in kindergarten. And suddenly the awareness was, how are we going to legally get out of California, because we were all American citizens. And somehow, with my good parents' ability to manage to get out, my father was in business, my mother was a physician. And what happened is that we managed to get out, the four of us. My brother was, at that time, and he already remained from the time he was a little one. He never grew into being able to talk or be ordinary. And so this little family of ours, we actually managed to legally get out of the state. And as soon as we got out of California, we were free American citizens again. And then my parents, on my side, grew up in New York City. My mother's a physician, and my grandparents were in New York City. So once we got out of California, we were free people again. It was really strange. And we got the legal papers from Sacramento that got us out of the state. So we got back to Los Angeles, got on a train that took us across the country and took us all the way to New York City, where my grandparents lived and where we stayed for a short period of time, and then we moved out to Kew Gardens. And then the years began of World War II, where how to get people out of concentration camps, how to get around. And so I had a very different early experience, because otherwise I would have just grown up in Los Angeles and gone to kindergarten and gone to first, second, third, fourth grade. And instead, suddenly I was in New York, and then I was in Kew Gardens, and then there's Grand Junction, Colorado, there's Denver, Colorado, there's this little town up in the middle of Idaho and things. And so I went to about 4 or 5 different schools and went into each new school, and often was the only Asian Japanese face in the class, which fortunately I was astrologically had a very pleasant, positive one, and had a very deep background. So I also took in a little bit of astrology to get a sense of making sense of myself. And it's been a very fascinating life, because at this moment I am now being honored at age 88.
Extraordinary.
So yeah, it does. It's
really.
like I didn't expect to be this. Well, I don't feel like I'm 88.
Well, you don't look like you're 88, and I understand that you are still practicing.
Yes, I am.
That's outstanding. So, who were some of the people in your life who inspired and influenced you in your journey to get here?
It's certainly to have good parents. To know that there was often a quality of feeling somewhat different than lots of other people. But as time went on, it seems like there's just me being me in this particular culture. So I don't usually even think about I'm so different from everybody, because I just am myself. And so that's a big difference, actually. And that I became a psychiatrist unexpectedly. It wasn't something that I had in my mind to become, but I had that insight when I went up to the mountains, and out of the middle of nowhere I got the sense of that rather than being a lawyer, I should be a psychiatrist. And I didn't know what was confronting me, but it made an impression, so I did do some pre-med courses, which I wasn't particularly interested in, while I was interested in all those other things. So I've had a very broad educational experience as I shift from one thing to another. So I can't quite fit into easy things.
That's okay. That's wonderful. How about an important learning in life that you believe has been key to your success?
Well, part of it is a family experience of having a sense of spirituality, which I remembered, I think it was in probably junior high school, where I was in Los Angeles in school, and then went up to summer camp. And wow, was it a difference up in the mountains of Southern California, where you could see the whole sky at night. And we slept out of doors, and you could look at all of the major movements of stars and things. And so the first time I went up there, it was just kind of awesome. Because Los Angeles had only gray, you couldn't see stars at that time in LA at all. So the next time I went up, again, it was only maybe the third grade or something like that, third, fourth grade, something. It was the second time I went up and was looking at the stars and the moon and things, something shifted. And that is what, when it shifted, suddenly I felt I was part of the universe, in it. Not it was over there and I was down here looking at it. I couldn't explain what that was about, but it put me in connection with a sense of being part of this whole universe, which is a theme that has continued, even though I don't orient it, I don't explain it, but as I get older and older and realize that by the time I'm pushing about 100, it's time to cross over, and that there is along the way, I've met a lot of people who have met people who have died, but are there in spirit. And I began to learn about that too. And so there's something about this sort of range in which there is, in this particular book, that I'm for the first time writing about my personal life, to write about being in Los Angeles at the beginning of World War II, when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and suddenly we were in trouble and we were going to be shifted off. So it's because we didn't do that. I went to different schools all over the United States and waited until it was possible to come back into California, which is our home state.
It's outstanding. So speaking of spirituality, how do you integrate holistic and spiritual practices into your work with your patients and your readers?
It has a lot to do with considering that both mind and heart, I'm the person who is doing the work with this other person who's come to do depth work, which is mostly Jungian in its practice of listening to dreams and having a feeling of talking with a patient who has these dreams, often only after they are comfortable enough to talk about how childhood was not easy. And now at 40, 50, 60, 70, when they're in depth and they are having dreams and things, we work together about, suddenly it's like their psyche has opened up to allow in a lot of what their childhood was like. And then when they could talk to parents who are still here, it's interesting that they thought about the parent who was only under 20 and was not a very good parent to this child who didn't find it very easy at all. So often they just sort of blanked it out for quite a while, and then they went to school and they went educated and they are adults in the world. But it's when you can start listening to dreams, and the dreams start talking about past in a different language. And when there's an opening that allows that person to start thinking and feeling about how they see their childhood from way back when versus now. So there's something about the person who is working with their dreams and can remember things. It's like their whole psyche is a bigger kind of a thing, and it is between one's head and one's heart or soul, like that.
That's fascinating. What are your? I know that we alluded to this, to your 14th book coming out, right next year in 2025. Would you talk to us a little bit about your new book?
It's the first book in which I write about and have photographs within it from my own childhood to now. And given how many years I have lived to now I'm 88, there's a lot of history, and a lot of history personally, but a lot of history that went on at the same time, from the time World War II began to the moving through the 4 years of the wartime before I could move back to California and things. There's been a very fascinating background that I never had much to say about it, because once I began to be a Jungian analyst psychiatrist, that had no relevance to the people I was working with. And so I think that given that I have been doing this for decades now, the people that are still around and who have often been very, very, I mean, when you work together with somebody in the past and they shift into actually forgiving or believing or honoring something in themselves and start to be able to follow what is their own innate, what to do with their lives, it is a different kind of experience than to stay within the boundaries that were set for them on their path. And so then sometimes I get letters from them now about, because it isn't something that people just stay in therapy, they're open to whatever is going to happen next.
So what would you say is your wish or your hope for the legacy that you leave behind?
I just have a trustworthy sense that every book that I've ever written caught me into putting into words what goes into each of the books. So there's some thick books and some thin books, and there's some, but basically I've always written in a very similar way to how I normally speak, so that it's readable. And then it goes out into the world wherever it goes, and lo and behold, it actually is in many, many different countries. And I just think that if there's something in a book, that if people had the words that helped explain something to themselves, they can find, the book can drop off a shelf. There's something about, my task is to be totally present with the person that I'm working with, to totally be involved in writing the books that I have. And I'm surprised at how many books I have written, because I was always doing it sort of on the side of everything else I had to do. But I wanted to put something down, so there they are.
So with the autobiography coming out, that'll be number 14. In the previous 13, do you have a favorite?
Oh, sometimes one favorite would be, the cover looks wonderful. The original cover looked awful. And that's certainly true of one of the books that I recently have gotten that has a abstract artist image on the book, on the cover, and before it's like, oh dear. And it was the first book I wrote that is out in the world. It's called The Tao, T-A-O, I'm sorry. It's not, The Tao of Psychology, spelled T-A-O. That is the title because the Tao was a familiar word, whereas the subtitle was called Synchronicity and the Self, and nobody knew what the word synchronicity meant. So it was my first book out. And it does talk about synchronicity in a very, very straightforward way. And one of the things is when you have a sense that something comes along, and there's a logical side in which you figure it out, and there's the other side when suddenly, for example, my most recent surprise was to be encountered with the perfect little dog that I could ever have and live with. And it came about by a couple of accidents or something like that. But synchronicities, it seems like there's a part of the brain that is open to new things for each person. but most people just stay on their own track. But if you get broader and you start to be interested in some of those other things that come up in a dream or come up as a feeling thought, or you're drawn to something and you're actually kind of fascinated with it, but you don't know enough about it yet, then things start to happen. And it's an interesting way that we can then grow so that we have both a right brain, left brain, a communication in the brain, but also the accidental synchronicities of meeting people or finding the right article or listening on television, and bingo, there's exactly what you want to learn. It's a very interesting time to be open to the notion of paying attention and realizing that, oh, it's something important.
Not an accident at all, right? Right? What advice would you give to young women aspiring to make a difference in their communities, industries, or the world?
They are lucky because, you know, all of this changed in recent history. The recent history, I mean, when I think back to what it was, would have been 1990, 1980, before becoming 2000, by and large, we women were not put in charge of various things. Those of us who went to medical school were a very small proportion, lawyers were a small proportion, things like that. Teachers were also, but from the time that we turned into 1900 and it's 1901 and now it's 1900 and what is this month?
24?
Yeah. When in this short period of time, there are so many women who have entered nursing, medicine, education, and what's interesting is watching them heading organizations. It wasn't before 2000. Well, it's a very small piece of history that women are moving into getting educated and using the combination of feeling and brain. So I've been encouraging more and more of that. That's what's happening.
And speaking of encouraging, I mean, it takes courage, right, for women to go and explore and to follow the path, perhaps, that they're feeling. How do you engage with the broader community to raise awareness and support for what you're doing? I mean, I know you write books, so that's a pretty great mechanism for engaging with the community and with people who can benefit and are interested in what you have to share and all your wisdom and knowledge. But are there other ways in which you are engaging with your community?
This is the first experience I've had with Marin, by the way. Marin, I've lived in Mill Valley up in the hills, and I would, except that I often lectured at the major bookstore in Marin County, and they have been wonderful with the books that I've had. And so I've had the good feeling about being in Marin, but I hadn't been aware that I'm just learning about about Marin. Actually, with this experience, I did not expect to be having this conversation. Didn't find out that unlike most counties, this county has grown and connected in such a way that there's a lot of opportunities for continuing knowledge that can happen. And there are continuing times when people can go into book areas here. And I just think of the bookstores here often, that you think about synchronicity when something drops into your hand practically. But I think we are so fortunate to be in Marin County. Right now, the weather is lovely. The trees are green. There are fires, there's temperatures going up across the country of the United States. We are here in Marin really fortunate, and I think there's something to be said for how there are so many women who have gotten involved in learning more since they had got married, had kids, lived here, something like that, and they're beginning to start helping people who are not economically able to do as much as women can who have been middle into upper class, which is true of most of Marin County. And Marin now, though, has an impression of people helping each other more than in lots of places. I think there's something of privilege here, because I think that's partly what we have to keep on learning.
So that ties in, really dovetails nicely into my next question, and that is, what is your hope or your vision for the County of Marin and its residents?
It's more like taking a sense of what do you think your family's doing? What do you think your community is doing? What do you think your school is doing? What do you think? It's hard to say, because it's hard to well, no, that's not exactly right. What I'm right now is what I have been learning just in the last 2 weeks. I had no idea that Marin Women's Hall of Fame has especially brought women's ideas and experiences out and make it available in such a big way. I didn't know how this was doing, because I was doing a lot of things in other countries and in other states of this world. And so to come back, so I have lived in Marin ever since. I loved living in Marin, raised kids when they went to elementary school in Mill Valley and things like that. And so this has been home. I've thought of this is the way I come back and come home. Now I understand that this county has elaborated, raised funds, and are making it more possible for more women who are here to grow from going to school, being married, having kids, having some kind of a job or something. But there is a potential when you think that it's not, one of the things that I found that almost every one of my close friends are on the other side. They died. They stayed on as being grandparents often, and then they faded out. I think that you don't fade out if you have something yet to do. You might get an infected something or other. You might need to go see a doctor and get it cured. But if you have something to do that you want to finish before, as long as you're still in a body, then I think you're going to live naturally much longer than you would have otherwise, because you have time yet. And as we grow older, we get wiser. We also become less ego involved in much of anything. It's just that if we can help do this, we can do this. And that kind of sense of value is what I think more and more women in Marin, because there have been a lot of women in Marin who were pretty privileged and raised their kids and were educated and are interested in organizations. But okay, what next? What next? And this is when the more you can be with people, by the way, and stay, like I've been in 2 groups of, or more than 2 groups of women for decades. Now that everybody is between 70 and 90, half of them are somewhere else, but we can talk to one another on screen. And it takes a while to get together now, because fortunately they only moved an hour and a half up the road. But in the other organization that I've met with over time, they're all over. They're in other places, and we can get together and encourage and whatever. And I think that it really helps to connect beyond just wherever you are in whatever little place you are, just to expand and to go. I'm really encouraging everybody to do that.
That's outstanding. Good words to live by. Have a sense of purpose is what I hear you saying, and you extend your life. You had a very interesting upbringing, right? Moving from state to state while we were dealing with the Japanese.
War, yeah.
That's right. Are there any other notable challenges in your life that you've overcome, and what have you learned from them?
Well, there's been a lot of things. It seems like within my own self to have you know, it was 4 or 5 years ago that the last major event that I had gone to was in Egypt, and my daughter Melody, who is married and is right now the mother also of a 3-year-old. Well, when we first got together so that she could travel with me to Egypt, where I was a public speaker to an international organization, we were scheduled to go fly immediately back to the United States, which we did. But almost everybody else who had gone to be at this major international conference or to speak at it, they were going to stay in Egypt for longer. And what happened was that Trump became president, and when that happened, you couldn't fly back to the United States for the next 30 days. Yeah. And we happened to travel back home again just before that stopped. So I got back to my practice and took, several days to relax and try to get into this time zone. And then I went to see, on a Thursday, a day of practice. And it turned out to be the last day in which I spent time in my office practice, because then the word came down that for the next 30 days, nobody can fly back into the United States. Mm. So all those people that were in Egypt had to figure out what they were going to be doing there, because they couldn't fly back home again directly for 30 more days. And that was a very interesting time to realize that was the last experience I had, and I'd been prominent in speaking internationally. And then to settle into my home space, well, fortunately, I'm naturally introverted, even though I have an extroverted persona. So I could do that because now I had the screen that I could work with people on the screen, and I didn't take on any new people, and I haven't since either. But it's been a strange time. From the time that Trump was our first president, and then he went out, and now he's come back in again, and meanwhile the temperature of our planet has gone up, and no one is saying how it's going to go down again. We are in a particular time of wonder, and can it turn out better? Can we, for example, realize that all human beings on this planet could stop trying to do in each other, but to live on this a special planet? For the first time, when we saw the planet go from outer space, they sort of went to the moon, but they took pictures of our planet without boundaries. And it's a beautiful planet. Plus the atmosphere gave it like a halo. And we've just only learned about it in maybe 15 years or something. It's not very long ago that we've learned where we are. And are we going to keep on killing one another and stuff? I hope not.
Oh, no. I love your phrase, though, a world of wonder. Jean, Dr. Bolen, as we wrap things up today, is there any last words that you would like to share with our audience?
Well, this is the first time that I've ever, in the 14th book that is coming out in March, where there are photographs at the end of each chapter as well as my own text. So it's not a lot of deep writing, it's a lot of true writing about what it was like from the time I was born and was in California and then had to leave because Pearl Harbor was bombed and we didn't get into, I went to all these different schools instead. And so there's a whole story about how, for the first time, all the people that I ever saw in my office practice at Langley Porter at UC San Francisco, where I got my training in psychiatry and all that, there was all this possibility of listening to and drawing out the story of the people I worked with, but I didn't talk about myself. So that I think it's going to be a rather large surprise for all the people that have been my patients. If they're still alive, they can learn about how it was when I was born in 1936 of all years, and how it was until World War II broke out, and then the whole situation of that and things like that. So I think there's something in it that I'm talking what had been very private, and I know that it's a new experience to really talk from the very beginning, and with the potential I still may have another decade to go. And in fact, when my son Andy died in his in his 20s, he got paralyzed when he fell because of surgery that was done on his neck, and he woke me up. I mean, he was in a hospital bed at home, and there was a male nurse that was big enough, strong enough to pick him up because he got paralyzed for the injury in his neck. And I slept on the sofa where the hospital bed was, where he was, and he just had a loud whisper. And if he had a loud whisper, it woke me up just like that, and I could go and help him. But that particular night, at about 3, 4 in the morning, I heard his old voice call me. And it woke me up initially, and I went to the bed and turned up the light. And usually whenever he called me, he was looking at me. This time his eyes were closed, but he was breathing. And he was breathing for several more breaths, and then he stopped breathing. And then, I called the ambulance. I called his father, who lives in the same area. So his father James Bolen, went to the hospital. I went to the hospital. And obviously, Andre was his real given name, Andre Joseph Bolen, had left his body. And he had spent his time at home reviewing his entire life. So once he could leave his body with just his soul, he was free again. And that's where his father saw him very shortly and heard him. Because his father was the editor of 2 of the magazines, including ones that had to do, the last one was called New Realities. And so to be inspired by someone who recently was dying, but went through his entire life, when he got out of the body, he was in his self again, and his father could see him. And then he asked his father since his father was the editor of New Realities, and previous to that, the Psychic magazine, our son, Andre Joseph Bolen, said, could he dictate, and would his father take notes? And so that's exactly what's happened. And now that's what I'm trying. His father is still alive, but I have seen his what he wrote out on yellow legal things in his own handwriting. But I'm trying to find out where it really is, and whether it can be. I'm pretty sure that most of it was actually dictated by our son. And when that's copied, I'd like to put it in a book while his father is still alive, and could write a beginning, and I could write a preface. And so that was what I'm still going to do after that ever-widening circle book. I have every intention of hoping to get our son's book about what it was like for him to have died and be on the other side. Who knows?
You are fascinating, my dear. You are so fascinating. It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much, Dr. Jean Shinoda Bolen, for sharing stories from your incredible life with us. And thank you, viewers, for tuning in. The Marin Women's Hall of Fame is a program of YWCA Golden Gate, Silicon Valley. If you would like to learn more about the Hall of Fame or our honorees, like Dr. Bolen, please visit us at www.yourywca.org.